The last blog for the 12th Anniversary Terran bundle has finally dropped. This means we finally know all the new ships, their stats, all the extra goodies in the bundle, and when it comes out. I have been super eager to find out what's in this bundle, so let's dive into it. The 12th Anniversary Terran bundle will be launching on PC on February 17th. It'll include 4 new Tier 6 Terran ships, which is probably why it's called the Terran bundle. These ships are the Lexington Dreadnought Cruiser, Cygnus Battlecruiser, Adamant Heavy Raider, and Trailblazer Science Warship, which are variants of the Yorktown, Galaxy, Defiant, and Intrepid, respectively. This bundle will also include the Mirror Strikewing Escort, aka the Mirror Angle. This is kinda cool because the Mirror Angle was previously only available as a lockbox ship, so with this bundle you'll be able to unlock it on your whole account. This bundle will also unlock a new skin for the Mirror Angle, the Mirror Earhart skin, the Earhart being the 2410 version of the Angle. There's a picture included in the blog, we'll get to it in a bit. Also included are some new Terran Empire themed costumes. First is the Terran Inquisitor's uniform featured in the episode Redshift, and some new variants of the Terran Odyssey uniform. There's also a new title, Inquisitor, kinda saw that one coming, and some additional goodies, a T6 ship coupon, 6 experimental upgrade tokens, 6 starship slots, 12 master keys, and 12 ultimate tech upgrades. Full price for the bundle will be 17,500 Zen, which is about 175 bucks. But the bundle will be at a discount for 25% off, that's 13,125 Zen, so a little over $130, until March 3rd, 2002. Wait, that can't be right. I'm guessing that's a typo because it makes no sense for the sale to end 8 years before STO even released. I think we can all safely assume they meant March 3rd, 2022. While there is a lot of great stuff in this bundle, 130 bucks is still quite a bit of money. I know there are a lot of people who don't want to or are unable to spend that much on a video game, and for those of you out there, I have good news for you. Because the 4 new Terran ships, the Lexington, Cygnus, Adamant, and Trailblazer, each of these ships will also be sold separately in the C-Store. So if you don't want to get the whole bundle, you'll be able to pick up any of the ships individually. Their individual full price will be 3,000 Zen like a normal C-Store ship, but for the first week of their launch, they'll be 20% off. So all 4 ships will be 2,400 Zen from February 17th to the 22nd. I should add that only the 4 new ships will be the individual purchases. Everything else will be exclusive to the bundle. I should also mention that all of these dates are for PC. The console sale dates have yet to be announced, but will be sometime within the following month. Here's a better look at the new Terran uniforms. Here's the Inquisitor uniform from the episode Redshift, and the new variants of the Terran Odyssey uniform. While personally I've never been that into making my characters Terran themed, these are still some pretty cool looking costumes. STO's character customization being as good as it is, I'm sure you'll be able to do plenty of things to mix and match these pieces with other costumes. Down here is the new Mirror Earhart skin that'll be exclusive to this bundle. The Earhart is one of several ships that were touched up to accommodate the new 7A hull material, and I'm guessing this is why. Owning this costume means you'll be able to use it on both the Mirror and the Prime Universe versions of the Earhart, the Prime Universe version being available in the C-Store. I'm not going to go over the stats of the Mirror Angle, mostly because it's not a new ship. It's actually been in the game for quite some time. I'm just going to talk about why I'm excited that this ship is being added to this bundle, and that's because of its trait, Superior Area Denial. This trait is very powerful with certain hangar pets. So if you're a big fan of carrier builds, this is definitely a must-have. It's also really good for tank builds thanks to its debuff. I can only speak for myself, but having this trait on my whole account is going to be very helpful for me. The console and experimental weapon on this ship are pretty good too. The console is rather useful for EPG builds, and while the experimental weapon still isn't as good as Soliton Wave Impeller, it still made Augie's top 3 for experimental weapons. So if you don't have the Soliton Wave Impeller, this is a really good substitute. Now, let's get onto the stats for the new ships. First up, the Lexington Dreadnought Cruiser. If you've played Redshift or the new TFO, this ship probably looks familiar by now, because it's also the Terran version of the Enterprise F. I am so excited for this ship. Of all the ships in this bundle, this is definitely the one I am looking forward to the most, and it's entirely because it's an Odyssey. I'm sure plenty of you know by now I'm kind of obsessed with the Odyssey, and I absolutely love the Yorktown's revamp. So now on top of that, we're also getting a version of the Yorktown with a sensor pod and a spinal lance. You can't see it in this picture, but there is a spinal lance cannon underneath the saucer, kind of like the Galaxy Dreadnought has in All Good Things. As you can see, this ship will unlock 3 new costumes: the Terran Lexington, a Federation version of the Lexington, and a Terran version of the Yorktown. Since there's a Terran version of the standard Yorktown in here, I'm assuming we'll be able to mix the Lexington parts with the other existing Odyssey variants. Now, let's get to the stats. The Lexington is a Miracle Worker Dreadnought, so it's going to be really nice for energy weapon builds. And because it's a Dreadnought, it's going to have a good amount of potential for both damage and tanking. The ship has a hull modifier of 1.375, which is pretty high, though not that surprising because, like I said, it is a Dreadnought. A shield modifier of 1.15, a 4-4 weapons layout, 4 device slots. For the bridge officer seating, first it has a Lieutenant Tactical / Intel, a Lieutenant Commander Tactical, Commander Engineering / Miracle Worker, 1 Ensign Science, and a Lieutenant Commander Universal. For the consoles, it has 4 Tactical, 5 Engineering, 2 Science, and 1 Universal because it's a Miracle Worker. It has a base turn rate of 8, which actually makes it the most maneuverable Odyssey in the game. All the other versions only have a turn rate of 6, a 0.15 Impulse modifier, and 35 Inertia. For its power bonuses, it gets plus 10 to weapons power, plus 5 to shield power, plus 10 to engine power, and plus 5 to aux power. The ship can equip dual cannons. It'll also have a hangar bay which will be filled with Mirror Universe shuttlecrafts. I'm assuming these are the same shuttlecrafts that come with the mirror angle, because there are no stats listed for the pets in this blog, and they have the same name as the angle's pets. It is a Miracle Worker, so it will have the Innovation Ship mechanic. The Cyclical Quantum Slipstream Drive, that's the one that lasts for like a minute and a half, again because it's a Miracle Worker ship. The Lexington will also have an Agony Phaser Lance, which I guess makes sense considering there's literally a Phaser Lance cannon on the model. It'll have the Attract Fire and Weapon System Efficiency Cruiser commands, which is pretty standard for a Dreadnought. Now, it says it has the Dreadnought Cruiser Mastery Package, but all of these buffs are actually from the Science Ship Mastery Package, so I'm guessing that's a copy-paste error. Hale, I appreciate you and everything you do for the game, but you really need to get someone to proofread these blogs for you. Now, as I said earlier, the ship comes with an Agony Phaser Lance. There are several ships with Spinal Lances already in the game, the Galaxy Dreadnought for example. They're not super useful for DPS, largely because there's no way to reduce their cooldown, but it's a neat toy nonetheless. And now for the console, Multi-Directional Artillery Barrage. Now, from what I can tell, this console basically just fires torpedoes in every single direction, dealing kinetic damage to everything in range. So buffs the bonus damage of each firing arc that has one or more foe inside of it, and buffs that bonus damage against enemies hit by any of this console's torpedoes. This console also gives passive buffs to projectile damage and maximum hull capacity. From the sound of it, this is going to be a really good torpedo build console, so much so that I can already sense Augie drooling over it. The Lexington Starship trait is called Dimensional Modulation. Activating Directed Energy Modulation or any Miracle Worker ability will grant a bonus damage buff to your weapons that scales with the number of foes within 5 kilometers, maxing out at 10 enemies. The buff will last for 10 seconds and can only be triggered once every 10 seconds. Looks like you'll get a 3% damage buff for each enemy, so that's a potential for a 30% bonus damage buff. A 10-second buff isn't a long time, but only having a 10-second lockout period, this trait is going to trigger a decent amount of times. So while I don't think this trait is going to shake up the energy weapon meta, it will definitely make a fantastic budget trait, especially for a ship with Miracle Worker seating. Now, like I said, there are no stats for the hangar pets on this ship, it just says Mirror Universe Shuttlecraft, which I'm assuming are the same shuttlecrafts that come on the mirror angle. According to this description, these shuttles fire Agony Phaser Beams, while I'm pretty sure the mirror angle shuttles only fire standard phaser beams, but they look like Discovery Beams. So these hangar pets could be different than the ones that come with the mirror angle. Again, it's tough to say without more information. I guess we won't know till Thursday. Overall, I am very pleased with this ship. Though it's an Odyssey variant, it really doesn't take much beyond that to impress me. Though seriously, it's a Miracle Worker ship with an intel seat. You could almost call this a budget version of the Inquiry. The fact that it's a Dreadnought with a Spinal Lance makes me like it even more. It also has what sounds like a really good console and a pretty decent starship trait. My one complaint about this ship is that it has a 4-4 weapons layout. I've said this many times, 4-4 is not good for energy weapons. And that's because beam arrays just don't pack the same amount of power as dual beam banks. You could put dual beam banks on a 4-4 ship, but then you're going to get screwed with your aft weapons because of all of the restrictions with Omni Beams. And even if you lifted those, it still wouldn't do as well as a 5-3, because another Omni Beam definitely isn't going to do as much damage as a dual beam bank. So yeah, the Lexington. It's almost perfect. I'm still gonna love it because it's a Yorktown, but I just wish it had a 5-3 weapons layout. Okay, next ship, the Terran Cygnus Battlecruiser. This one actually comes with 4 costumes: the Terran version of the Cygnus, the Federation version of the Cygnus, a Terran version of the Andromeda, and a Terran version of the original Galaxy. The ship is kind of interesting because unlike previous versions of the Galaxy, this one's a battlecruiser, so it's going to be a bit more tactical focused, which is actually kind of refreshing because the previous versions of the Galaxy have always been obnoxiously engineering heavy. Another interesting thing is that it's also a temporal ship. That is not a specialization I would ever expect for the Galaxy. Though I'm not going to complain about it, I actually like temporal ships. The Cygnus has a hull modifier of 1.525, which is very high for a battlecruiser, a shield modifier of 1.25, a weapons layout of 5.3? Wait a minute, the Galaxy is getting a 5.3 weapons layout, but the Odyssey isn't? That's just... Ugh. Okay, I'm glad that we're getting a 5.3 Galaxy, but come on, it makes so much more sense for the Lexington to have it. Ugh, let's just move on. Anyway, 3 device slots, a Lieutenant Tactical / Command seat, a Lieutenant Tactical, a Commander Engineering / Temporal seat, a Lieutenant Science, and a Lieutenant Commander Universal. It has 3 tactical consoles, 5 engineering, and 3 science, a base turn rate of 6, which is very low but also pretty standard for the galaxies, an impulse modifier of 0.14, and 30 inertia. So this is going to be one of those ships that handles like a drunk house on ice skates. It gets plus 10 to weapons power and plus 10 to shield power. It can equip dual cannons. It's a full temporal ship, so it has the molecular reconstruction beam. It has 3 of the cruiser command array abilities, strategic maneuvering, field frequency modulation, and weapon system efficiency, which is pretty standard for battlecruisers. It also has the Battlecruiser Mastery package, which should be no surprise, meaning it'll have buffs to physical and kinetic damage resistance, crit severity, energy damage resistance, and maximum hull. The ship's console is called Destabilized Dimensional Rip. What this console does is project a rift 8 kilometers in front of you. Any enemies caught in the rift will be banished to the Terran universe for a short period of time. They will also take phaser damage when coming into contact with this rift. Now, if I'm understanding this console correctly, it sounds more annoying than anything else, because we're talking about the ability to literally make enemies disappear. I feel like this is just going to be used to troll people on random TFOs. I don't like the sound of this console. It also comes with passive buffs to EPG and phaser damage. The starship trait is called Controlled Aggression. With this trait, anytime you activate a Universal Console or a Temporal Bridge Officer ability, you'll gain a buff to control expertise based on how much you have in your exotic particle generator skill. Now this sounds kind of interesting for a control build, but the buff is very low. Plus 5 to plus 30 control expertise? That's practically nothing. Honestly, this trait is just a waste of a starship trait slot. Okay, console and trait aside, this is actually a pretty decent ship. This is a 5-3 battlecruiser with temporal seating. All that temporal seating means you're going to have a good amount of abilities to trigger unconventional systems. So with a ship like this, you'll be able to keep your universal consoles active for a good amount of time, assuming you have unconventional systems. We finally have a galaxy class that has a proper amount of tactical seating. It's going to be pretty difficult to fly with that turn rate and inertia, but it's doable. I am still annoyed about that weapons layout though. Not that the Cygnus has 5-3, but more that it got 5-3 and not the Lexington. Seriously, that makes no sense whatsoever to me. It's a Dreadnought with a spinal lance. It makes way more sense for the Lexington to have the 5-3 layout. Okay, let's move on before I start screaming like a crazy person again. The next ship is the Adamant Heavy Raider. Of all of these ships, this is the only one that actually has a totally new ship model. All the others are just modified Terran versions of existing ships. As you can see, it is a new variation of the Defiant. This one comes with 3 costumes, the Terran and Fed versions of the Adamant, and a Terran version for the Defiant. The Adamant is a full intel ship, which really fits the theme for a Defiant variant. The Defiant was always rather stealthy because, it had a cloaking device. So this will be interesting to see a Defiant that doesn't have pilot seating. The ship has a hull modifier of 1.15, a shield modifier of 0.8, 5 forward weapon slots, and 1 aft, which actually isn't that weird when you take into account that it's a Raider. The Maquis Raider and the Klingon D4X are also set up the same way. It'll have 2 device slots. For the bridge officer seating, it'll have a Commander Tactical/Intel, an Ensign Universal, a Lieutenant Universal/Temporal, and 2 Lieutenant Commander Universals. Again, this is a Raider, which is why it has all that universal seating. Honestly, the weirdest thing about this to me is the temporal seat. I never would have expected that for a Defiant. For the consoles, it has 5 tactical, 3 engineering, and 3 science. It has a base turn rate of 20, an impulse modifier of 0.22, and inertia of 75. So this is going to be a very maneuverable ship. For comparison, the original Tier 6 Defiant, the Valiant, only has a turn rate of 17. I'm guessing this is why they didn't give it pilot seating. It really doesn't need it to be more maneuverable. The Adamant also has a plus 20 to weapons power. It can equip dual cannons, obviously. Has something called a combat cloaking device, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's new. I've never heard of that. There are various types of cloaks, all of which get slightly different buffs, or function a little bit differently. There's no information in the blog about what a combat cloak is, and I can't find any on the wiki, so I'm assuming this is new, so I guess we won't find out any more about it until Thursday. The Adamant is a Raider, so it will have access to Raider flanking, meaning you'll deal additional damage against an enemy's rear arc, which will stack with space flanking from the intel specialization. The ship does have an experimental weapon because it's an escort. This is a full intel ship, so it'll have the Gather Intelligence mechanic, which desperately needs a buff, and it has the Raider Mastery package, giving it buffs to accuracy, defense, all weapon damage, and crit severity. The Adamant comes with some interesting extra goodies. The first being an Agony Quad Phaser Cannon. They sound very much like the standard quad phaser cannons that come off of the Tier 4 Defiant, except that they'll have the Agony Phaser proc, though I don't know if it'll be worked into that equipment set. Either way, they sound really cool. Additionally, the ship also comes with a unique experimental weapon, Terran Repeating Warhead Launcher. Based on the description, this experimental weapon fires multiple torpedoes at a target at once, over the course of 2 seconds, and have a recharge time of 8 seconds. They'll also have 20% shield penetration, and the experimental weapon gives itself a plus 30% to crit severity. This definitely sounds like an interesting weapon. I'm still not convinced it'll be better than Soliton Wave Impeller, because Soliton bypasses shields completely, and you can increase its haste. but it certainly has the potential to be a really great experimental weapon, especially for torpedo builds. The Adamant's console is called Agony Redistributor. This console seems like it's supposed to be some sort of space agonizer. For each second it's active, the amount of hull you deplete from your target is stored. Then it deals phaser damage equal to 33% of that stored damage to up to 20 foes within 5 kilometers of your target. It also has passive buffs to flight speed and inertia rating. This console sounds interesting, but I really can't say how useful it's going to be. It just sounds like distributed targeting with extra steps. I can see times where it would be kind of useful, like if you're targeting a boss that's surrounded by smaller enemies. It could definitely be helpful in clearing out both the boss and the smaller units at the same time. But really it sounds like something that's just going to generate a lot of threat, because that's exactly what you're going to get if you're dealing damage to 20 enemies at the same time. So I guess maybe it could be a decent tanking console? I don't know, we'll see. The Starship trait is called Wild Weasel. Activating evasive maneuvers or any intel ability will call in a Wild Weasel shuttlecraft to distract nearby enemies. The Wild Weasel will attract up to 20 targetable torpedoes or mines and the 5 nearest enemy vessels. It'll taunt them into attacking it until it's destroyed. This trait can only be triggered once every 45 seconds. Wow, and I thought the Cygnus' trait was weird, because this isn't very good at all. I mean, ignoring the fact that it does nothing to benefit your DPS, but it only taunts 5 enemies, which odds are you're going to be closer to a lot more enemies than that, and it can only be fired off once every 45 seconds. A lot can happen in 45 seconds. I'm not saying it should be lowered, because then you run the risk of making users totally untargetable. I'm saying the concept of this whole trait is just not very good. At least for the way I play. Maybe you'll think differently. Anyway, overall, I am actually very impressed with the Adamant. The console sounds pretty meh, and the trait sounds terrible, but the ship itself has great stats, and those Agony quad cannons and the experimental weapons sound really interesting. And now for the last ship in this bundle, the Terran Trailblazer Science Warship. This one actually comes with 5 different costumes. The Terran Trailblazer, the Federation Trailblazer, the Terran Pathfinder, Terran Warship Intrepid, and regular Terran Intrepid. The Trailblazer is a science warship, which is a totally new type of science ship. Just based off the name, you can probably expect it to be pretty tactical heavy. The ship has a 1.15 hull modifier, a shield modifier of 1.3, 4 forward weapon slots and 3 aft, which is actually unusual for a science ship. Typically you only see a 4-3 weapons layout on a spearhead or a science destroyer in tactical mode. Though this is a new type of ship, so I guess we can add science warships to that list. It has 3 device slots. For the bridge officer seating, it has a Lieutenant Tactical / Miracle Worker seat, a Lieutenant Commander Tactical, an Ensign Engineering, a Commander Science / Command seat, and a Lieutenant Commander Universal. For the consoles, it has 4 Tactical, 2 Engineering, and 5 Science. It has a base turn rate of 12, an impulse modifier of 0.18, and an inertia rating of 50. It gets plus 10 to weapons power and aux power. It also has an Agony Phaser Lance. That's really weird for a science ship. The ship can also equip dual cannons. It's a full command ship, so it'll have the inspiration abilities. It's still a science ship, so it'll have subsystem targeting, sensor analysis, and a secondary deflector. And will have the standard Science Vessel Mastery package, which gives buffs to exotic damage, shield HP, healing, and shield regeneration and hardness. The Agony Phaser Lance seems to be identical to the one that the Lexington gets. Honestly, putting a lance on a science ship is a very odd choice. Especially this ship, because this is not something I would run energy weapons on. It's a science vessel and a command ship. So just based on those 2 factors, I would either run an EPG build on this, or a torpedo build. With both of those build types, you're going to have more of your power focused in your auxiliary systems, not your weapon systems. So on this ship, that Phaser Lance is not going to do much. And even on ideal setups, lance weapons don't do much to begin with because of their long cooldowns, which can't be lowered. So while this is something that's kind of amusing on this ship, it's really not going to be all that useful. The Trailblazer's console is called Decentralized Immunity. What it does is create a Rampart Deflection Drone, which will be active for 10 seconds. During that 10 seconds, you will be completely immune to damage. However, the drone is targetable and can be destroyed. If it is destroyed before the full 10 seconds is up, the console's cooldown will be partially refunded. This console also gives a passive buff to shield capacity and critical severity. The crit severity buff will scale based on your Starship Exotic Particle Generator skill. 10 seconds of immunity is not a long time. Honestly, I really can't imagine a circumstance where 10 seconds of immunity is going to be helpful. And this is going to be completely irrelevant on the high end, because most people running elite TFOs usually run with a tank, so you usually don't have to worry about getting shot at. So unless that passive crit severity buff is absolutely enormous, this console really isn't that great. The Starship trait is called Weaponized Exotic Particles. Anytime you activate a standard firing mode, you gain a buff to your EPG skill, which actually sounds pretty decent for an EPG build, but the buff really isn't that high. It's only plus 50, and there's no information on how long the lockout is. But yeah, maybe a decent budget trait for EPG builds, but honestly this could have been better. overall, again, aside from the trait and console, this is another really good ship. Being a science vessel, it's going to be pretty good for EPG builds, but being a science warship that's also a command ship, this will also make a really good torpedo boat. Heck, you could probably even put a decent beam overload build on it thanks to that Miracle Worker seat, and because of the extra weapon slot. Actually, this whole ship kind of feels like a budget version of the Janeway. So if you like that ship, or if you've had your eye on it for a while, this might be a good ship for you. Okay, some final thoughts. First, how do these new ships compare to existing versions of these ships? Well, for the Trailblazer, this is probably going to be the most powerful Intrepid in the game, largely because it's the only one that can support a torpedo build. It's also much more tactical heavy than the C-Store or Legendary versions of the Intrepid. The other two are more typical science ships, which are really only suited to EPG builds. Because this is so much more tactical focused, you can easily put a weapons-based build on this ship despite being a science ship. So if you're not accustomed to sciencey space magic build but still want to fly an Intrepid class, this is the version I would recommend. The Adamant is similar, but also in some ways pretty different from the C-Store and Legendary versions of the Defiant. While all of them are going to be pretty well suited to the same type of build, which is going to be energy weapons, the Adamant is probably going to perform a bit better than the other two. Because not only is this thing an intel ship, but it also has a temporal seat. So you're going to have a lot of unconventional systems triggers, so you're going to be able to keep your universal consoles up a lot. The Adamant is also a raider, so not only does it have access to raider flanking, but it also has a lot of universal seating. So if you pilot it right, you can get a lot of damage out of this, and you can set it up pretty much however you want thanks to that seating. The C-Store and Legendary versions both have pilot seating. In fact, the Legendary version is a full pilot ship. And while pilot seating isn't nearly as bad as it used to be thanks to Synthetic Good Fortune, I would still definitely take that Intel Temporal combo over pilot. That said, a Defiant with pilot maneuvers is still a lot of fun. But that's only on the Legendary version. So if it were a choice between the Adamant and the normal Tier 6 Defiant, which is called the Valiant, I would choose the Adamant, no question about it. The Cygnus is very different from any previous Galaxy class in the game. It's a full temporal ship and it's a Battlecruiser, whereas both the C-Store and Legendary versions of the Galaxy are both exploration cruisers with command seating. These versions of the Galaxy could make decent torpedo builds because they have command seating, but they're pretty light on tactical seating, so they really make better tanks. However, the Cygnus is much better suited as a beam overload build, though it's really only good for beam overload because it's not really good for anything else. It does have a command seat, but it only goes up to Lieutenant, so no Concentrate Firepower 3, and no CF3 means no torpedo build. And because it's a battlecruiser, it doesn't have attract firepower, so it wouldn't be my first choice for a tank. So if you like tanks, go with one of the other two Galaxies. But if you like beam overload and unconventional systems, then I'd pick the Cygnus. The Lexington is also very different from previous versions of the Odyssey. All three C-Store variants and the Legendary version all have command seating. In fact, the Legendary version is a full command ship. But this is a Miracle Worker. So while the previous versions are better suited to torpedo builds and tanks, this is definitely an energy weapon build. Though it would be a much better one if it had a 5-3 layout. And I still say this one should have gotten it instead of the Galaxy. Now, final thoughts on the bundle overall. Do I think it's worth getting? Yes, I usually do. This shouldn't be that much of a surprise. While the bundles can be pricey, they are often packed with a lot of good stuff in them. So if you can afford to spend that much on the game, then by all means. This bundle comes with 4 fantastic new ships, a lockbox ship with some really good stuff on it, a T6 ship coupon, so that's 6 ships, plus enough T6X tokens to upgrade them all, plus some new costumes because we all know Space Barbie is the true endgame, plus a dozen master keys and ultimate tech upgrades, which are kinda nice too. But if you don't want to pay for the whole bundle, you have that option this year, because each of the new ships is being sold separately as well. So this anniversary is kind of a win-win either way. So yeah, that is the 12th anniversary bundle. I don't know about you guys, but I am really excited for it. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and all 4 of those new ships look absolutely fantastic. Plus, I really like how Cryptic has made all 4 of the new ships individual purchases as well. That way people who don't want to pay for the whole bundle can kind of pick and choose what they want. Anyway, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. I know it's tedious to hear every time, but it is YouTube. It does help the channel, and I really do appreciate it. My name's Stu, and I'll see you guys next time.